Hello, and thanks for watching. Over the last couple days, one of the big questions in the news in the United States has been, have daily deaths peaked? Are we really sort of seeing the worst of it right now, particularly in places like New York and Michigan, and others, and that we're now going to see the number of fatalities every day start to slowly subside as the effects of our social distancing have sort of taken hold and we're sort of past the worst of it? And it's a really important question to ask. By way of summarizing where we're at right now, I wanted to do a couple of things. Today we're talking, as I said, about the USA. The world is at 1.8 million cases, diagnosed, 110,000 deaths. And it's interesting that today, and maybe I'll check yesterday to see if I didn't notice, but I usually crop off the total number of recovered, which used to be this third panel, but it's now the total number of tested in the US. And that's a really important thing because in the last week, the U.S. has really started doing a lot of testing. And so one of the big questions has been, is this case number at all reasonably accurate? And we know it's an underestimate. Is it fivefold, threefold, tenfold? And from that, can we understand more about case fatality rates and also about expected deaths in the future? So, and the U.S. Death total so far is 20,000 and climbing. So in the news, just a couple of things. The British Prime Minister was discharged from the hospital, which I think is wonderful for all of us. This is actually a picture of him before he got sick, so he already had the bags under his eyes and this sort of sallow kind of I'm not feeling my best look. But hey, maybe I do too. The real reason I put this slide up is because right below it in little tiny print, there's 9,875 deaths have already been recorded in the UK. And this gets back to that old adage that a single death is a tragedy, and 9,875 deaths is a statistic. And there are 975 people that have pictures that aren't going to be in the newspaper. And just a reminder that when we talk about these huge numbers, there's a tragedy, there's a family, there's a friend in behind every one of these. Couple roundup of the news. Trump has many task forces, but still no plan. Fabulous, fabulous. Title of an article. U.S. likely hits its peak death toll, expert says. And that comes from the CNN, and the U.S. coronavirus death toll tops 20,000, more than any other country. So we have just surged past Spain and Italy into the largest number of deaths cumulatively. We had over 2,000 on Friday. We've been hovering around 2,000 for several days. There's been some fluctuations both in the number of cases reported and the number of fatalities recorded in the States the last couple of days, which has made modeling really difficult because the models have not always converged. I usually try several different approaches and look at the sort of convergence of them, and they haven't converged well, so that's an issue. In New York State, the all-time high was on Wednesday with 800, and they're down to 780, 770 in this past 2 days, which is really not down much, but at least it's not climbing, right? And then it goes on to say that according to Dr. Chris Murray and the Murray model, the U.S. likely saw a peak in its daily death toll. I thought that was really important language. And I don't think that's a mistake. Not the peak, but a peak. So let's keep an eye on that in the future, because I don't think he's committed himself to the fact that this is the peak, but just a peak in what may be several peaks in the future. So, and he says in this thing, we run the model basically almost every night. I do the same thing. I run data analysis every night. And he says at the national level, we seem pretty much close to the peak, although we are suggesting different peaks in different states. That's also harkening back to my older videos where I said the state predictions for different states were flip-flopping quite dramatically, from New Jersey from 2,000 deaths to 10,000 deaths estimated to 5,000 deaths, all within a period of 6 days. They're now updating their model every 3 days on a schedule rather than daily like they used to. Whatever. So this is just some of the stuff I've been doing. I've been modeling cumulative as well as daily rates. When I'm doing daily rates, I'm using a moving average approach because there's so much daily fluctuations. The cumulative values are more stable. I'm using it in log 10 metric as I have been because of the exponential form and the way it handles variability is appropriate. And then I take those models, that's what comes out here and over here, and I'm pointing at the screen, which doesn't help you, but okay. The stuff over here is predictions and upper and lower confidence bounds for those predictions. And I'll come back to the confidence bounds later, because I realized after looking at this that there's something very bizarre about the Chris Murray model that I want to bring to everyone's attention. Now, you know, I've been ragging on that model a lot, and it's because I think it's been poorly described and defended and highly hyped, but that doesn't mean it's not right or wrong. So what you're looking at here is both cases and deaths, and it's really hard to show you both daily and cumulative. So these bars are the daily cases, which seem fairly flat. This is the cumulative deaths, which you can see in the last 4 days. I actually downloaded this data earlier yesterday, so I have data through the 11th. These 4 days were hovering around 2,000, and they were sort of have been the highest we've seen. And so the question is that because we've hit our plateau and are going to start receding, or is this just a part of the wiggles and we're still going to grow? These are the cumulative functions for both of those things. Now, interestingly enough, if you look, you see this is a linear scale. You see some evidence of exponential upward, or at least concave up growth in deaths, which suggests that the rate of deaths is accelerating, although the last few days it seems fairly linear. So it's not obvious how to interpret that. And the fact that this is linear is actually pretty interesting, because in an exponential model, the only way you can say linear is if the doubling time is slowly declining. Otherwise, it would be concave up again. And so we'll see that when we switch over to the log 10 scale. So I'm using the log 10 scale and I'm marking it off. These are cases in thousands, so that's 100,000, 25,000. These are deaths in thousands, 10,000s. In both cases, I know if it wasn't for the COVID thing, I would have replaced the computer already, but I can't because whatever. All right, in any case, notice that the overall shape of the cumulative cases is concave down. It's decelerating, which I modeled both with a quadratic and a cubic, and I tried different time periods of 10, 14, 18 days in the past. It's not so obvious that deaths is in fact concave down. There's evidence of concave down for sure, but there's also this really highly unstable sort of reporting. And Chris Murray mentioned this in his one of his estimation things on his website, that there seems to be some cyclical or sort of high variability in reporting, where a low day will be followed by a high day and so forth, and that may have to do with weekends or whatever. And that does seem to be supported by the evidence. It's very difficult to work with data that fluctuates significantly, where there seems to be a plateau at 15 or 1600, and all of a sudden, boom, there's a plateau at 2000. So is the next plateau back at 1600, or is it up at 2400? That's the big question, right? So these are the models I ended up fitting. Squares are deaths, circles are cases, light gray is daily, dark grayish, blackish is cumulative. On the log scale, you can see them at the same scale. You can see that when we model the best fit cumulative case and the daily case, it does seem like the daily cases are starting to turn down using this part of the model, but this one doesn't necessarily agree with that. This looks like they're continuing to increase at that almost linear level. So these models did not converge as well as I would have liked. I ended up using a weighted model, taking the two together, both the cumulative and the daily, and model averaging them. And I've been a real opponent of model averaging in the past, and I don't know if I like what I did, but hey, it's something. And this is the model for the overall deaths. And you can see there is strong concave downward for the best fit model. I just said there wasn't much down. Anyway, here's this thing again. For the moving average thing, it does look like it's peaking somewhere in here. Whether it peaked here, the Chris Murray model said it peaked yesterday or the day before. This actually predicts the 14th, I think, or the 12th as the peak. I'll have to look. It's coming up. Okay, so I took those things and I actually used the confidence intervals that come from the estimation and the uncertainty, and I actually graphed those for you to show you that what happens when you're modeling like I'm doing, and you're modeling a relationship and then predicting it into the future, your predictions get more and more uncertain the further you are away from your data. That's just a natural consequence of the modeling one, because the highest precision is right in the middle, in the center of your data. The further you get out to the edges, it gets less certain, and then when you get away from the edges, if you get into extrapolation land, they get even less certain. And we often don't know. We're making an assumption that level of growth of error is consistent, but we really don't know. We have no data there. So that's really interesting. So like if we had 10,000 deaths today, I'm pretty sure we're not going to have 30 tomorrow or 30,000, right? But in 10 days, we could have gone up or down a lot, right? So you should see that, and I think that makes good sense. So this is the weighted model because the models weren't exactly the same, and the weighted error bars. And what I was mentioning before is the cumulative model and the moving average model differ. The cumulative model says we're going to continue on and that we might be close to 1 million cases in 10 days or 12 days, whereas the moving average model really showed a deceleration in the daily cases, and we were going to be heading toward 800,000-ish. And or 750,000-ish, and so it's the two models were quite different. There was less variability in the moving average models, so when we average them together, it's the overall average is more reflective of the moving average model. I don't know if that ends up being right or not. We'll see. It's hard to see here where the biggest jump is, but for this model, again, this is the model averaging of the daily moving average and then the cumulative totals, which use different approaches, but both in theory should be able to get at the right answer. And I think on the 14th, so in 2 days, 2.5 days, we're going to get 24,900 total deaths, and that day we'll see 2,102 deaths, which is just a handful more than we've already seen. I think we've seen 2,086 yesterday or the day before. So we are, I believe, near the top. My estimate is about 200 higher than the Chris Murray model in about 3 days or 4 days later. So they're not dramatically different because there does seem to be strong evidence of deceleration in deaths. But I have problems with that because we're taking the U.S. as an aggregate, and right now the aggregate is being driven by New York, and to some extent the early part was driven by California and Washington as well. And those epidemics are fairly mature in the sense that they've gone through a really huge growth phase, and there's been significant social interventions and a very high level of cooperation because it was very clear there was a problem. And so those states were early adopters of some of these social distancing things. Yet now we're seeing higher growth rates in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Illinois, maybe Texas and Florida, New Orleans. I think that's probably most of the ones I wanted to mention, maybe Massachusetts, I forget. So I'm not so sure we know what's going to happen here, because I think we might be seeing the downturn associated with the first couple of hard-hit cities, and then coming up is going to be another one coming from Detroit and from Philadelphia and from Boston and all of Jersey and so forth. Now, the current model suggests that the falling that's going to happen in New York, which has been the biggest problem, is faster than the rising that's going to happen in these other states. So it overall will sort of peter down. But I'm not convinced we know if that's going to happen or not. So I don't know if we'll see a second wave. This is actually not a wave, a second ripple in the top of this peak associated with those states continuing to grow, because we don't know how quickly their measures actually will help tame the epidemic in their states. So have daily deaths peaked? I would say not quite. This is the actual New York Times visualization, and you can see that we had this peak around 2000, and then it dropped, and then it peaked again, and then it dropped. It's very hard to know what to do with this because the overall relationship is going up, but when you plot it in the logland, it is quadratic, it is curvature down, and so it's a mess. And these 7-day averages are trailing statistics because they take today and the days before, and so it's gonna it won't. The fact that it hasn't peaked in the 7-day average is not an indication that we're sure it's going up. Just saying. So, getting back to what I started with, the U.S. likely saw a peak in its daily death toll. That's an interesting. I should stop pounding on the desk. I get all excited and I hear it later on in the thing. So this is the thing that I was really intrigued by now that I started thinking about my own predictions. So according to the COVID-19 model, which is their most recent model posted April 10th, they're apparently going to post an update tomorrow. They predicted 1,983 deaths on April 10th. We have seen 2,086 deaths since then on a single day, so this is a little low. That's actually not at all a huge mismatch. I'm not, my prediction of 10,000, 11,000, and whatever it is, isn't much different either. No, not 2,100 and some odd. Is not much different either. But I wanted to look at this. This is the slider bar that they use. And there's my little mouse icon. And they predicted that on April 12th, which is today, we're going to see 1,910 deaths, which is down a little bit from the peak. And their confidence band goes from 444 to 5,458. So yesterday it was 2,000-ish. And today the range is from 400 to 5,000. That doesn't make any sense to me. So their model, and they say this in their some of the FAQ materials, they assume over time things get more and more stable because you get more and more data and things converge and they get really predictable later on. So if you look down here, it looks like the models become pretty certain that it's going to extinguish by around June 1st. So I wanted to point out that the shape of their error is exactly the opposite of mine. Theirs is a sort of a huge variability right away that then sort of seems to decrease, whereas I am looking at local prediction only, and I would argue that my predictions get worse the further away you get from my data that I was modeling, right? So interesting then. Now, what about long-term predictions? What's going to happen on, May 26th, which is this particular day here? I got no idea, right? That is so far from my data, and there's so many issues with behavior, how we let up, if we let up, and how we comply, if we comply, what our testing rates are, that I don't have any idea, and I'm not going to even try. But they have, in fact, predicted assuming full social distancing through May 2020. So they're basically saying we've stopped new transmissions because we're social distancing, and we're just going to play out the rest of this epidemic set of chains of transmission, and it's going to peter out by around June 1st. Even so, their predictions are still pretty interesting. So deaths per day, 116 on the 26th, with the range from 2 to 526. So that's not a 5,000 death range. It's only a 500 death range, but it's still a fair amount. But they do predict it'll be all done by June. And I think when you put right up there in big green letters, assuming full social distancing, I don't see full social distancing. I see people outside. I hear parties getting busted in San Bernardino where people get shot. So you can always say in a month when it's wrong that we didn't do full social distancing. So you've covered yourself from any criticism by arguing that we can. Anyway, I don't know what I think about that. So I have been working on a lot of things, and I get halfway through and I don't have time to finish them, and then I start the next day and data has changed and I want to do it again. The two things I really want to show you guys is another state and county summary from the U.S., not only cases but growth rates, and really highlight the places where things are getting worse fast and things are getting better in other places. And I want to look at the Sweden experiment. And this is something that Trump called out. Sweden has not really done any obligatory lockdown. It's been a voluntary sort of approach. And their their federal health epidemiologist argued that they had the health facilities to handle the COVID-19 outbreak, and that they were doing fine with their voluntary measures. And I think a week ago it was hard to tell Norway from Denmark from Sweden, but I think in the last couple of days you'll see that Norway and Denmark's curves, like Germany and Spain before them, are starting to trend down, and Sweden seems to be accelerating up. So Sweden's playing a really high stakes game, high risk, high reward. The high reward is they didn't shut down their economy. They haven't taken an enormous social, physical, mental sort of hit for their citizens. And they are banking on the idea that people will do a good enough job social distancing when they feel sick that they'll be able to keep the epidemic from becoming so overwhelming, and it won't lead to so many extra deaths. But the evidence is starting to point toward the fact that I think it's failing as an experiment, and that there is a gathering epidemic. And if that's the case, they're in trouble. They're Spain, they're Italy, because now, if they change their mind, it's going to be 2 weeks before things start to improve, maybe 3. And so I want to show you the data and how compared to what are similar countries, and I'll use some of the Scandinavian countries and try to find other countries in and around Europe that have similar populations or had similar growth rates early on in the epidemic spread through Europe, and then see if they continued on the Sweden path or whether Sweden kind of distances itself from the pack in a sense because of this behavior. So that's what I have coming up next, maybe even today if I get a chance to. I really like working on these data. It's really interesting to me, and I hope it's interesting to you, and I appreciate you listening.